Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the third International Conference on Alcohol and Harm Reduction in Cape Town, South Africa in 2006. And of course we have with us as our guest to talk about this third international conference that was held in Cape Town, South Africa in 2006, Ms. Joyce Perkins. Ms. Joyce Perkins is a social activist and who has been involved in a number of issues dealing with society and social problems for the last many years. And of course, Ms. Perkins, let me welcome you to the show this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Haney, and thank you for having me on your show. And again, my name is Joyce Perkins, and presently I'm working with the First Response Center of Metropolitan Interdenominational Church with Reverend Edwin Sanders and Dr. Sharon Crawford, who is the executive director. And what we do is we have a large ministry with HIV/AIDS education, treatment, and prevention. The program that I run is a treatment program. It's a 5-year federal funded program that actually is over December 31st of this year. We work with folks who have long-term substance abuse problems with opiates, meaning your heroin, your Oxycontin that you hear so much about. We have very intensive, but we have a biopsychosocial model that we're able to manage.
And so in a real sense, Ms. Perkins, you've been involved in this whole issue of AIDS, alcohol abuse, and et cetera, and that was one of the reasons that sort of prompted you to become involved in this third international conference. You know, what I'd like to do this morning, Ms. Perkins, is to take advantage of the fact that you were in Cape Town, South Africa, and that you carry with you a whole series of social activities and things that you've been involved in, and to have you in a real sense give us some, first of all, as you indicated, some information about your background and some of the things that prompted you to become involved in this third international conference. And at the same time, after our first commercial break, we're going to get into a report in a real sense from Cape Town, South Africa. So let's do it that way.
Okay, and you know, I'm a graduate of Tennessee State University. I graduated in 1980. I'm from New York originally, and I've been involved with civil rights movements back in the 60s, and every issue that ever existed with HIV/AIDS is something that I have stood up for in a way in which, so back in 1985 when I saw my first participant at Mahari, there were just issues there that just said, this is where I need to stand up and be present. And what happened was I had the opportunity, this is my second trip to South Africa, and during the first trip we were able to go over there and basically take a quick view, take an assessment of some of the needs. And I was determined to go back there on my own because I wanted to really feel the sense of the streets in the way in which we couldn't do it on the first trip. And you know, the good is always working, and I was able, it was very grateful that I was able to get this trip in order. I stayed at a YMCA with very moderate facilities. The compound was in a very high-risk area. The whole entire compound was locked. You had to have a key to even get into it, and then you had a double lock to get into your rooms and things of that nature. There was security there, and I say that, you know, and I had no fear. I felt safe the whole entire time. The issue of HIV/AIDS is just so, whether it's here in this country or certainly the magnitude that happens in South Africa, is just so great with what is going on. And the conference was the beginning of it in terms of allowing myself to meet people from across the world, specifically around Africa, and certainly there were other countries represented as well too. And the conference had 4 working groups. There was a group on youth, there was a group on alcohol and sexual behaviors and transgender issues, and the issue of policy to research the policy, and then working with nonprofits and profit organizations. The thing that was really interesting was the fact that they had people from the liquor industry there that stayed for the whole conference.
You know, what we'd like to do this morning, Ms. Perkins, is to get some additional information. We understand that you have some images in reference to that, and to have you to explain some of these images during our second segment. But now we're going to have to stop for our first commercial break, and we'll be back with you for the second segment following this short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. The topic is the third International Conference of Alcohol and Harm Reduction held in Cape Town, South Africa in 2006. And we have with us an individual who was a participant in this event in Cape Town, South Africa, Ms. Joyce Perkins. And of course, Ms. Perkins, let me continue our conversation of the last segment, and at the same time to recognize that you do have a number of images from South Africa that you'd like to show us and talk about today. And so let's let you do that from that perspective.
And like, you know, I took the first shot, and I just wanted to say that Cape Town is a city of contradictions. It is probably one of the most extraordinary, beautiful cities I have ever seen. Not that I have traveled that much, but it's just truly pure beauty. And on the other side, I have never seen such poverty and unacceptable living conditions for an individual in the year 2006. So I show that, you know, and then
it's really a city of contrast. Is that what you're saying? That
contrast and contradictions. I mean, the word contradictions is there because, on one hand, if you don't want to see anything, you don't have to.
Okay.
And I had the opportunity of being able to talk to some white South Africans, and they don't know my politics. They don't know where I stand, and they were able to really share some stories. One in particular on the mountain was just amazing. We had stopped for a little pit stop, and there was a group of white South Africans hiking, and we chit-chatted, and once we started talking about HIV and AIDS, they said, oh, our health minister says that AIDS is a joke and that it can be cured by broccoli and beets and lemon juice. And it really filled me up, you know, and I just said, this is not correct, you know, and if there's one thing that I can share with you on this moment is that AIDS is not a joke in your country. And just recently, November 6th, there's a new health minister, which seems to be a step in the right direction in terms of change. And she made that same statement at an international conference in Toronto maybe about 6 months ago. But these are the messages that people get, and they say, oh, well, this is just a joke.
And this is at the same time when most of us recognize Africa as being one of the leading continents in the world that has been impacted by this disease almost everywhere, and yet and still in Cape Town, South Africa, there's a belief among many of them, people who are in a real sense outside of those individuals who might have some contact with this disease. Is that what we're saying?
That's true. I mean, if you don't want to see it, you don't have to, you know, and the thing that I was able to do is, again, attend this conference. The picture that you're looking at is a group of working with youth, and the man that heads up the YMCA, Llewellyn Sink, their wives don't have gyms or swimming pools, but they have missions where they go out to the prisons. They have a part where they have these kids who don't want to live at home because of the violence, because of the drugs, and they just don't want to be there. They're as old as my grandchildren. They're 8, 9, 10 years old. They're out using glue and drugs and tick, which is our methamphetamine, which is all over the Cape Town, whether it's in the black, colored, or white communities. And they don't even have a handle of what's going on in the colored and black communities because of the fact that news just doesn't get reported. It's left to the local
people with the compounds within those areas
to get the news out. It's not in mainstream. There was a riot that took place in one of the townships, and it wasn't even reported in the media. And you have situations where I was able to one of the volunteers lived in a township called Valhalla. And the first day we were out, he said to me, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to go someplace where tourists don't go." He said, "Come with me." And we were able to take these taxis, not really taxis, they were like vans with 25 people, and we took 4 taxis to get to his place. It took us about an hour and a half. He travels 3 hours every day to volunteer to do this work that he does with the prisons. Now, he was a military person who was a bodyguard, but he was also a gangster and a drug lord working with some of the biggest drug dealers, and he was able to take me around the township where he lived for over 30 years, and we walked every street of the blocks. And what happened during that time is you saw families really holding together and working, and I'm hoping that you're viewing the pictures as we're looking at them now, and they're trying to pull their families together. The children go to school. I don't know, the school is not free. They have to pay for their books, their clothing, and somehow they get, the education is most important. The families, you also see pictures of these homeless kids that again are 8 and 9 years old. There is no structure. They can either come in or not come into to their drop-in center. You're going to see pictures of women who, I went to a women's clinic where they have pregnant women. They have 90% of the women. I got there at 9 o'clock. There had to be at least 400 women in that compound, and 90% of them are HIV positive. And their babies are positive because they're not getting the medication. I went to a compound where a program called Thelber, where they have babies, and that was sad, not only because it was babies, because in this country, pediatric cases are almost unknown because of the medications. There's no medications that are out. And to walk in and see 25 infected babies and toddlers was a sad statement. And yet when you talk to people, people are getting medications. They're not if the babies are being born. And there are volunteers. It's across culture. You have white volunteers, you have black and colored volunteers coming in and helping out.
Do they still use the old apartheid distinctions in Cape Town as well? You know, colored, black, and white?
And it's very, I mean, there was a compound of housing is still very, you know, there are people living in townships, and we passed this one very large development of housing that was empty.
Well, we're going to have to take our second commercial break here, but let me say during this last few seconds here that when we come back, we want you to explain some of these townships and some of the problems that you personally saw while you were there, and leading on later on to this whole idea of perhaps raising the question, what can the world, the international community do? Because it seems that this is a real problem in that there's almost no knowledge in reference to it. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to this final segment of the show for today. The topic is the International Conference on Alcohol and Harm Reduction in Cape Town, South Africa, 2006. And we have with us our guest, Ms. Joyce Perkins. Now, of course, Ms. Perkins, let me give you an opportunity over this last segment to talk about some of the things that you saw in South Africa that you believe our viewers would be interested in, and in a real sense give us a report, because we've not been to to Cape Town, but you just came from Cape Town, and tell us within that perspective about what you saw, and then later on you can perhaps give us some recommendations in terms of what we ought to do in reference to what you saw.
Oh, thank you. And I think that in terms of the drug problem that I witnessed and saw is that, one, they have alcohol is just rampant. One is it just culturally accepted, it's available and it's cheap. And this new drug, it's not new here in this country, it's called tick there, it's called methamphetamine. It is rampant in the townships and it's rampant throughout Cape Town. And the person that was taking me around, my guide, 10 people died in 3 days of tick overdose. So, and that was just,
that rampant.
that is what was happening, and that, I mean, it was one of his best friends that had been that overdosed from it, and it's very, and it's, again, it's cheap, it's available, and people use it, and there's no treatment. There is only one treatment center in Cape Town that's sponsored by the government. I got to see that. I'm sure that you've seen the photo of the treatment center there, and there are private treatment centers, but you have to have money to do that. It's not available. In terms of what the townships were like, I mean, people care. You see people mending their housing. They're trying to paint them, make them look nice. You see clothes hanging out all the time. The children are in school. Again, schools are not free. They have to pay for them. They need clothes. The kids are just, they're out either close to their families, my observation, or else they're just wandering around the streets. There was a kidnapping of a little girl in one of the townships. The way news gets posted is that they take the front page and they just post it around the townships. And I went to several townships, but you know, it just seems to be not everybody buys a paper, and not everybody has a TV. The electricity is scarce. Electricity goes out. Everybody does not have electricity. There's townships, where there's houses that I went into where there's wires all over the place, and yet you have next door neighbors hooking into the electricity because they haven't got electricity. The issue with HIV and AIDS and medication and electricity. I asked at the center where the babies were, I said, what's the hardest part of working here? And they said, the babies come in and they're compromised, they're not doing well. What happens, they get fed, and they start thriving, they go back to their homes where the mother is infected already. They give them medication and a refrigerator. They throw the refrigerator out and they throw the medication out because then everybody knows they have AIDS, and the stigma is just so visible that they don't want to be part of it because people just get beat up. They've been people have been killed and beat up to death because they have HIV and AIDS. So, you know, when you have those kinds of stigmas, it's very hard to move forward with the magnitude of what's out there and what you see. The other issue is the prison situation. I got to go to the prisons, and these were boys that were young men that were 18, 19, and 20 years old, in there for murder, killing, rape, and drug offenses. They have a system there called 26, 27s, and 28s.
26, 27s.
27s and 28s. And the 28s sodomize, they're sexually abusing people. Not much different than what goes on here, but there's a system that just really works like that. And then the 27, and it's usually the big guys that are doing the violence. And then, of course, the HIV, there are condoms. The 28s don't like the condoms. We sat and talked for 2.5 hours with these guys in terms of how they can take care of themselves. And there were some 28s in the room being able to hear what was being said. And of course, and then I'm gone. So, you know, it's a very serious problem. We have a epidemic globally. We're going to be celebrating World AIDS Day. The theme this year is keep the promise and accountability.
But now what we're saying here now is that since Africa is such an important continent, that unless we can really deal with it, with this situation in the Cape Towns and the Durbans and all of these other cities where we've heard reports, then there's absolutely nothing that we should hope of ever eradicating this disease. Is that what we're saying?
Well, you know, I mean, again, if I, you know, I think of the 20-odd years I've been working, you know, I always think there's hope. I think that people need to be accountable. I think that people in grassroots and in political elected officials, we have been doing this work for 1980, you know, it's 27 years already. and we know what needs to be done. We don't have to have any more studies. You know, we need to put into practice what we already know. In terms of drug use, we have a country here in this country that won't even let needle exchange exist to help addicts keep themselves clean from AIDS and from hepatitis C. The same is true. There are, you know, countries that need this kind of, it's a very inexpensive, it really needs to be paid attention to in terms of prevention and education. But leaders and elected officials need to take a stand, and there needs to be a real pulling together of resources. I mean, there's no, as long as there's hunger in this world, there can be no justice, you know, and you're losing potential teachers, you're losing, I mean, potential, no matter how you're looking at it, you're losing a segment of a population. It's a genocide.
You know, and of course we've got about 3 minutes, but I think that the message that you have is not only an excellent message in terms of AIDS prevention and et cetera, but I think it's also a message that could be used by dealing with some of our young people, which is to say that you've talked about the lack of education and what people will do in terms of education. Why don't you use the next 3 minutes that we have here to talk to our young people who really don't seem to have an interest in education and et cetera, and perhaps tell them about what is being, you know, how other individuals in Africa and other places might yearn for the kind of free education that's here.
All I can say is, I think Spike Lee said it, wake up, you know, just really wake up, use every moment. I have 3 grandsons. I tell them every day, use your brain, pay attention, listen, and, you know, school, it's the thing that you're going to do for the next 20 years. You know, I mean, you can say it as a joke. I mean, when I look at all the Game Boys and everything like that, put it aside, take a book, read, talk to somebody, talk to an adult. I mean, education is so important, you know, as well as, you know, being part of the community, you know, paying attention to what's going on. And this is for the older adults, the young adults. I hear stories about TSU students just wasting time, not paying attention, not wanting to do their work. The same is true over Vandy. I was in a conversation last night. Everybody is like, I don't have to do anything. We have health care, we have every issue is back on the table. You know, we need to wake up.
Very good. And one of the things in reference to these reports about dealing with Africa, do you think that there's some way that we can create a new national consciousness among our leaders in terms of dealing with some of these issues?
Look, I mean, you know, there has to be the private and nonprofit sectors working together. The churches are involved. There has to be not separatism, but really a coalition and being inclusive of every piece of resource possible. Because again, I see it as a genocide. You know, I see people dying. I mean, even in this country, I mean, we have, what are we talking about? Sexual behavior and drug behavior. Something that could really be stopped. 27 years into the, you know, pan-epidemic, and it's still here. And there's still new cases, and African Americans are still in the lead of new cases that are happening. Something's not right with that picture. We're doing something that, you know, we got to be talking to each other more. We have to be able to be open and hearing new ways of doing things, because what we're doing is not working.
Very good. And of course, over this last half minute, Ms. Perkins, let me thank you for coming by and giving us that excellent report on what is going on in Cape Town, South Africa, in addition to all of the other information that you gave us, especially to our young people. I think that will be instructive to them. And of course, let me also encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.